Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining myself, Chris P, and Robin Russell on our Coach Development webinar. Robin, welcome. Give us a little bit about you, Robin, and we'll get straight into it.
Yes, thanks very much, Chris. Yes, I worked for the English FA for quite a long time, about 26 years, in education, coach education, and grassroots development. I then left to become a consultant with UEFA, which I still am, the last 15 years, in grassroots, and the last 4 or 5 years with the Asian Confederation. And I'm also doing some work for US Youth Soccer on a program called GRIP, which is about growth and retention. So basically, the purpose of today's seminar, webinar, is to look at retention and the role of the coach in retaining players. Because worldwide, the issue is not necessarily attracting kids to soccer, it's retaining them once they've been attracted.
Brilliant. Yeah, so Robin, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn over control panels to you, and I'm going to make you the presenter so you can go through your PowerPoint. And I know we're going to try and keep this tight, but we'll put in the show notes everything you've done. You are a Rush board member as well, and if I'm not mistaken, you were involved in the writing of the FA Charter standards, and then the Grassroots program, and then also implementing the small-sided game in England and traveling around the country and doing that. But today's purpose, we'll get into the GRIP stuff, which is the Growth Retention Impact program. Is that right?
Yep.
That's the acronym for it. And then we'll get going, and then we'll get questions from the audience, and we'll also get we'll have some questions around that. And by the end of this webinar, we will have sent out a survey, right?
We'll be sending out the survey subsequently.
Yeah. So anyway, without further ado, Robin, let me make you the panel presenter, and then you'll be able to share your screen and go through that PowerPoint. Okay?
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. So you should be able to see, Robin, the two little screens on the panel, two computer screens where you can share your screen, and then we'll get through with your PowerPoint. People, if you're on and can hear us, just type in the chat. Yeah, brilliant, Robin, we can see it. Your GoToWebinar, connected to GoToWebinar.
All right, 1 second.
Yeah, bear with us, everyone.
Can you see that, Chris?
Yep, coaching for retention.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris. Just to move this along then, what we're going to do is look at these particular aspects. Why is it important? Which groups are at most risk? What are the problems? How can the coach help? And that's what we're going to walk through. Retention is an aspect throughout all of world soccer in the developing countries, the developed countries, and it's worth repeating what Einstein said, that if we keep doing the same thing and same thing again, then we're really not going to affect it. And insanity is actually doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. We're talking about overall playing participation, not the potentially talented. We're not talking about academies. We're not talking about developing players for college soccer or for the professional game. We're talking about retaining as many players as possible. But we are saying that the retention in soccer is not at the expense of other sports. Indeed, you'll see some examples of multi-sport. And it's not retention in order to specialize in soccer. So why is retention important? If we agree that sport and soccer has some health, social, educational benefits, then these are only going to be achievable if players continue to play. the financial stability and the sustainability of the club is dependent on retaining players. Rush clubs know this as well as anybody else. And the next generation of volunteers and coaches and referees are going to come from those players who have had a spell, a decent spell playing soccer. It also relates to the financial stability and sustainability of the sport. This is an issue, as I said, all over. There's some figures as far as we've done in UEFA on 6 countries that basically those that currently play and those that compared to those that used to play or indeed never played, participants are key to sales of match tickets, whether you subscribe to a soccer TV channel and whether you purchase football merchandise. So it's really important to the sport that we retain the players. Which groups are at most risk? Well, I'm sure you're all familiar with the relative age effect. If you're not, Google it. But basically, late birthdays, Q4 birthdays. If your registration period begins in January, we're talking about birth dates in October and November, December. They are 15 to 20% more likely to quit than Q1 birthdays. That's Dutch FA research. Does this happen at your club? Do the kids who quit, are they more likely to be the Q4 birthdays? Do you have the data for your club that you can check this? That would be the group that's most at risk is late birthdays. So looking at, this is a typical state association in the USA. You'll notice the curve of participation starts low, peaks, and then drops off. The competitive and the recreational aspects, and the recreational percentage. That's, you would say, well, typical. What's new about that? Well, if we dive down a little bit lower and look at the growth, now we can do this as we've been doing by tracking the individual players. So that growth starts off very high and then drops off. The second group I would say to look out for is the teenagers. Basically, soccer has stopped growing players after 9 years of age. So we all assume that marketing for soccer is at the younger ages. What about those teenagers on those from 10-year-old onwards, 10, 11, 12, 13? Why not market to those teenagers who used to play or maybe never played? Why stop marketing and promoting to teenagers, particularly if they just like to play recreational soccer? So the next bit is turnover. Now, what does this diagram show? It shows that turnover is really the opposite of retention, but it's highest at the earlier stages. So whilst here it's going up, the overall participation is going up. That's masked at the young ages because growth is still high. So the analogy is this: we're filling the bath at the younger ages, and the bath water's rising, and we think that's great. Actually, we've still got we've taken the plug out, and the water is coming out of the bath. The level of water is only increasing is because we're still growing. So if we could reduce the turnover at the early ages, we'd increase the number of players. If we could grow the players in teenage years, we'd increase the number of players. So which groups are at most risks? I would say all 5 to 10-year-olds, keeping them in. Those teenagers who want to play soccer but don't want the regular practices and over competitive games, they may come back and we do them. If you want to check that website, it's a massive website in Europe for recreational soccer. I just want to go back to this particular aspect here, in that the turnover rates, once they get to under 9, under 10, are quite steady. So the evidence is that there is a group of players here that like competitive soccer and stick with it. But that's so that our idea that, oh, well, it all drops off at 13, 14 isn't borne out by these stats. And these stats are repeated in a number of states. So the point with being this is that the turnover is greatest at the earliest years, and can we increase some growth in the later years by marketing to either non-players, 12, 13, 14-year-olds who haven't played soccer, or in fact maybe they've played earlier and dropped out. So those are the three groups I would say that are at most risk. Check it out in your own clubs. Look at the data in your own clubs.
There's actually, sorry, Robin. There's can you hear me okay? There's actually some data shown. I think it's 75% of teenagers are dropping out in this country, right? I don't know whether it's in every country. And then 84%, and I could be off on the percentage, but 84% of kids under 6 have played the sport. But then those drop out, those numbers become significantly high. And I think some of the work that we've done and what we've seen is the parents, we haven't done a very good job in engaging and educating the parents on this is what soccer might look like for your 5 or 6-year-old. It's normal if they don't want to play and they want to pick flowers or make aeroplanes. But then the parents, what they do is they see that and they go, soccer's just not for my child because they didn't participate and they didn't like it. So then it's sometimes the parent that's pulling the child out because they don't think that the child has grasped the sport. Is that, would you say that's in line with some of the research or the findings that you have going on?
First of all, I think you have to make any assumptions based on data. And the figure thrown out at 75% dropout, that's the total numbers. The total numbers are dropping off, but we don't, underneath those total numbers, we don't yet know until this particular study, how is that related to growth or retention? As I've showed, you can still be increasing the total numbers of playing the sport whilst retention is dropping. So it's possible, and it is the case in the younger ages, that retention, people, the dropout rate is at its highest at 5, 6, 7, 8, but that's mass because they're still coming into the sport. That doesn't really show until later in the year, later in 12, 13, 14, when you say, look at the numbers, it's the retention. The retention has been low since the beginning. The retention gets better from the figures we've shown in the teenage years because those that have opted for competitive soccer are staying there. So I would say this, in your own club, do the data, track the individual players before making any assumptions. And I would question the often say that 75% drop out as teenagers, so that we don't know underneath that the growth and retention aspects. Yeah. Okay, so what are the underlying problems? Here's some of the issues that are thrown up. Is it cost? I spoke at the German Grassroots conference last year, and there was a presentation about the average cost of registration for under 18 player in Germany. It's €4 a month. It's about $1 a week, if you like. These are similar costs in the UK and France and Holland. So the often quoted, it's the cost in the USA, which leads to high levels of turnover. The high cost of playing may be a factor in actually attracting them to the game, but there is levels of retention, levels of turnover. It is a problem in UK and France and Holland, in Western Europe, in Asia, retention is a problem elsewhere, where there are far, far cheaper registration programs. So they still have a problem with retention. Is it competition from other sports? In Europe, that's ice hockey. There's about 1 million. That's ice hockey in the Czech Republic. Probably, I show that because it's. I'm going to come back to the Czech Republic. That's probably the highest in Europe, 120,000. That's what it is in Germany. I mean, there's about 2 million soccer players in Germany, about 21,000. So it's about 1%, if you like, in ice hockey. So it's no great retention. They're not leaving soccer to play other sports in retention in Europe. What about the USA? Well, I'm fascinated with the increase in flag football. The New York Times in an article says there's the increase has been 38%. So what are the key aspects of flag football? It's playful, it's informal, it's recreational. In many cases, it's co-educational, and there's an optional commitment. I don't have to go to practice. I don't have to. I can miss 1 week and come back another. It is very informal, and it's playful competition. It's competition from e-games. FIFA, EA Sports FIFA is the most popular computer game in the world ever, and there's a record of some of their sales, phenomenal sales, and it's soccer, thank goodness. There's a number of copies that have been sold. 2015. It's outselling everything else. People say there's no value in e-games, and I use that quote there from two parents who realize that e-games, video games, if you like, fascinate them. They're inspired by them, and they notice that the kids' development in leadership and friendship and strategy and social aspects is really quite phenomenal. So, what are the common features of e-game? Playful competition. We come back to. It's social. It's self-organized. No coaches or coaching. It's problem solving. And there is an optional commitment. I might play tonight, I might not play tonight. And there's a high level of imagination. So we're going to keep coming back to these key features. So key features of flag football: playful competition, social. Key features of e-games: playful competition, social, self-organized. Is there enough free play? Well, the Belgian FA has started 2 versus 2 and 3 versus 3 for 5 to 7-year-olds. They've noted a 25% increase over 3 years. The recommended coaching points they recommend for 5 to 7-year-olds is none. No coaching. Facilitate, sort out the field, make sure that they understand the rules, but no coaching. And if you want evidence of that, have a look at that particular YouTube example there. No coaching. It's playful competition. And woof, they've had an increase of 25% in those ages over the last 3 years. There's an example of the sort of thing many of us used to play. Just very, very, very simple. 2 versus 2. Free play. There's a site, if you have a look at it, Joy of the People, an interesting site. They believe in free. It's absolutely free. It's free play, no set teams, no leagues, turn up and play. It's mixed age, mixed abilities, music. And if you want to have more information, have a look at that particular aspect there.
Ted Croatan. Ted Croatan? Is that Ted Croatan? Yeah.
That is Ted, yes.
Yeah, he's been a guest with us as well.
Have a look at this particular club in England. They've been voted the FA Charter Standard Club of the Year. They have waiting lists. They can't get. They don't. Their problem is capacity, and their simple free pledge is that, first of all, the children's views must be sought, and at least 50% of the games are free play, and the adults should facilitate the game to meet the needs of the kids. So it's self-organized, it's their views being sought. It's free play. So we can sit there. If you're saying what works, okay, we've got e-games, we've got flag football, we've got what they're doing in Belgium, what they're doing with Joy of the People, and what they're doing with Salisbury Rovers. Use of imagination. The UEFA have just taken on board a program run initially by the FA, the English FA, using Disney characters for helping the imagination of those 5 to 6 and 7-year-olds. It is play. It is very playful. And it uses, if you like, storytelling. That is it. So if you want some links to that, look at those particular articles there, or that particular YouTube aspect there. Quality provision, is it just all kickabout? Well, the evidence in England shows that this is FA Charter Standard clubs, which we started about 18 years ago now, so that 80%, 78% of all youth football is now in Charter Standard clubs, which means that those clubs have to reach certain higher standards in terms of they all need to be, they all need to have child protection clearance, they all need to have had some education, there is some stability in the club, etc., etc., etc. So the evidence that the FA would show is that retention is 15% higher in those 80% of clubs than it is in the 20% that aren't part of the accredited provision. And an interesting, an unbelievable project in the Czech Republic, because they were concerned about maintaining these kids, and the links are at the bottom there, you can check it, that they've had a 92% retention rate since 2014, 2015, with the very high quality program that they have for those particular young ages. And it's free, lots of free play. But if you look at those YouTube videos there, you will see it is also multi-sports. It's physical education using the medium of football. So again, it's multi-sport, it's play, it's imagination, but it's done with in a high quality situation. When I say that the adults involved have been through, they've been safeguarded, if you like, they've been checked out. So is it coach quality retention? The Germans, I say, have a problem, as we do have with the retention. But in Germany, their research would show there's only 40% of the grassroots coaches with any training. And in Holland, the average is for a grassroots coach is 4 years lifespan. So it's a very short lifespan, if you like. They're only going to get 4 years out of volunteer. These are all volunteers, of course, but the levels of training and the length of time that the grassroots coach is going to be in is quite short. It's very short. So that was some research that I did about 4 years ago with technical directors. What about the needs of grassroots coaches? They found course attendance for these people was difficult, but they wanted more information about how to coach, not what to coach. So not yet another passing drill, not yet another dribbling move, not yet another drill. They wanted to, that's the what to coach. They wanted more information about how to coach, making it fun, understanding children, and understanding age appropriateness. So I do wonder sometimes when I hear of clubs, well, we've got a great curriculum, you know, for our under 9s or under 10s or under 8s, and it's about our influence in the club. We want all the teams to play the same way in our club. And I'm thinking, these are 8 and 9-year-olds. It's about play, and the evidence is it's about play. It's about being self-organized. It's about helping them use their imagination. It's not about us imposing curriculum, if you like, on the kids. So how can the coach help? Is the club performance focused? or is it participant focused? In other words, are you judging your, and performance may not necessarily mean results, because as we know, results aren't everything, but are you judging the coaches on how many players they're retaining, or are you judging the coaches on the performance of the players? Now you might say, well, if the players are taught to perform better, they'll keep playing the game. Well, we go back to Einstein then. We've always thought that. We've thought the best way to keep players playing the game is try to improve them. And I'm sure coaches do try to improve them, but that's performance focused. Are we really participant focused? Yes, there is a group that want to be performance focused, but are we providing that too early, far too early? And is there another group that as they grow older want to be more participant focused? In your club, are you performance focused or are you participant focused? What sort of learning environment does the coach, facilitator need, the coach or the facilitator need to create? Now, the evidence is they've got to be safe, accredited coaches and facilitators. It has to be in a safe environment. Okay. But then playful competition. It's child-led. It's self-organized. It's problem-solving. It's optional commitment. It's co-education. It's social, and it exploits their imagination. Is technical knowledge the most important aspect for the coach of young players? No. I would suggest that the evidence is increasingly showing that the programs who are doing most at the younger ages are those where technical knowledge is actually, if you look at Belgium, not important. They do not want anyone coaching the kids at those younger ages. If you actually introduce selection, if you have tryouts, if you start to select the kids, then almost immediately you open the door to a relative age effect. And therefore your teams will be biased. If you don't believe me, have a look at your own club. What sort of game environment does the coach need to create? Well, again, this is obviously a part of the club policy. Relative age effect, is there agreed minimum time? Is it playful competition? How are you organising to make sure it's playful competition? Are there teams and leagues and league tables? For example, in England, there are no league tables for mini soccer until 11 years of age. So there's mini soccer, and teams play each other, and it's competitive, but they don't publish results, and they don't have league tables until 11, because league tables is an adult concept. It's not a kid's concept. Let's have a look at different strategies for different ages. Worth having following this young lady on Twitter, Amy Price. She's looking at how basically video games and the format of video games can help in retaining the interest of kids in soccer. So if you want to look at those particular examples, how you can use the format of video games to help kids retain their love and their imagination and their desire to keep playing. There's some references that Amy's already created. She's a lecturer in coaching development here in London, but she's already done quite a bit of research about learning to play soccer using video game design and unlocking the potential of a games generation. Have a look at those things here. Amy's 4 C's at the bottom are cheat, challenge, change, and clue, which any of you who've been playing video games or e-games will understand those particular aspects. As an example, here's a video game design, and the instructions on the right there are for the kids. They are instructions for the kids, if you like, and then off they go. When I say instructions, that's the context, the prompt, and off they go. And there will be certain aspects within that. To give you an idea, 25 years ago, we had in England, we had the football curriculum guide for schools, which we developed. And as part of this at the back, we had challenge cards where teams were given a card with a certain scenario. There's a scenario, your team is 3-0 ahead in a knockout competition, but you've got one player less. Outline how your team will play. Ask the kids to discuss that. Here's one at the bottom. Your team was one player less than the opposition. How will your team's attacking and defensive tactics? The score is 1-1. Is this going to be sophisticated tactics or not? No, but it's an opportunity for to give some ownership to the kids, and you can have you can devise these yourself quite easily. So, key questions to ask the coach. Do we assume that if we coach players to improve, this will automatically retain them? You ask your coaches that. How much of the practice session is organised and led by you, and how much is it led by the players? So I'm a great believer in coaches planning sessions, but how much is it planned by you, and how much self-organisation do they have? And you're going to say, well, can you do that at younger ages? Of course you can. That's what kids do when they play. They organise themselves. How much of the session is free play? Salisbury Rovers say, well, at least 50%. How many times do you intervene? And what percentage of the session is you talking, listening, or watching? That's very interesting. If it should be more about listening and watching, how are you preparing your coaches to listen and watch? We all prepare coaches to talk, but how are you preparing them to listen and watch? And have you used video or e-game format to provoke and inspire your players? How often? What results have you had? So, what works in your club? Do you actually track retention and growth? Which programs and coaches are most effective in retaining players? Do you use entry and exit surveys? Do you use end of season surveys? Do you ask the players at the end of each session? And do you have a club retention plan? Regarding the top aspect there, what works in your club? This is a concept we've come up with, the soccer garden, if you like. You can use it to look at the teams in your club, and basically top right hand corner are the ones that have got high player retention and high growth. It's not meant to be judgmental in any way, but how would you classify your particular teams in your club using that format? Is that format at all helpful at all in terms of how would you classify the various coaches or the teams in your club? So if you have a club retention plan, what are the key elements? What does it look like? Are the parents and coaches fairly aware of this? Does it work? Does actually your retention plan work? If it does, where are the bright spots? At what ages? And what gender? Who's doing it well? And as an example there from that particular club in England, 7 very simple aspects. Talk less, say more. Less options, less numbers, less progressions, less telling, more independent thinking, less showing, more problem solving, less talking, more listening. So anyway, we have we'll inform you about a Rush survey on retention, which we're very interested if you could take. The respondents will receive the survey results in obviously overall format, completely anonymized, and we will provide access to a Coaching for Retention blog. We'd be interested if you could contribute to that blog. If you're interested in the data and analysts and surveys that I've mentioned, then it's Adam Conant. Satari Soccer is the guy who's heading up that, and that's the person I work with. As again, if we keep thinking, right, it's 2 practices a week and a game on a Saturday and 30 games a year, and if we keep doing the same thing over and over again, it is insanity to think we're going to get different results. So we must look at how we are being, if you like, instead of being performance-based, we are participant-based. Okay, there's my email, my website, and the email of Adam Cook. Okay, Chris, for the time being, that's me. Over to you.
Yeah, brilliant. So I'm going to just make myself a presenter again, if that's okay. Robin, are you still there?
Yeah,
I see you. Yeah. So brilliant. We've got some questions. We've got some people on. If they think of questions, I've just been busily scribbling notes here. And it's funny because you mentioned Salisbury Rovers, which I think is Debbie Sayers, right? And I've been following Debbie's work, and we've had some conversations. But then you mentioned Amy Price, who's coming on. We have Amy Price coming on in May as our webinar to go over video game design and stuff we've talked about. This is a statement more than a question. This is Tim Schultz. Thank you for presenting excellent stuff. Thank you so much, Robin, from Tim. I know Pablo's on as well. So hopefully there'll come some questions. So a couple of key things, right? You pulled upon the fact that in England the retention rate was 15% higher with the charter standard clubs.
Yeah,
right? That was one of the stats. Quality control, yeah. And then what I'm taking away from this, Robin, is obviously you talked about the Belgian FA, ages 5 to 7. They don't really want you coaching; they want you facilitating.
Yes.
So it's not always stepping in. The key words that kept coming in was playful competition, free play, which our buddy at Joy of the People, Ted Croatan, does very, very well. But the federation has made a movement here in the US, and I'm sure you're aware of this, but the methodology at the grassroots level now is the play, practice, play. Right? So there's a big movement now to use this methodology of play, practice, play, where the first play phase is just the coaches observing the children playing. And then they bring them in for their practice part, which might be themed on dribbling, where they have more challenging, less challenging, but they're giving children also an opportunity to have a choice in whether they want to do the more challenging or the less challenging. But what I'm not seeing there as of yet is having the children be involved in that learning process and stuff like that. And then the second part of the play. Pablo's just echoing, he's typed in, it wasn't a question, he's just echoing Tim's sentiment of this is excellent. So I'll keep going with some of the questions, and I'm sure Andrew Crawford will come up with a question or statement.
Can I just say that, Chris, I'm not suggesting that play, practice, play is not a viable option. All I'm saying is if that what you want to do in a club, then can you track it and monitor it to see if in fact it works? If it does, let's but we would be saying play, practice, play, because we think that's the best format for kids, and I would suggest we think it's the best format, but we don't have any evidence to do that. Now, in your own clubs, you can have pilot groups. You can look at various groups to say, okay, what really works? Now, I know you're going to have an inspirational coach, and we've all had inspirational coaches, and they have been enormous, but inspirational coaches are few and far between. What sort of format is most appreciated? We know that kids in mainstream education at very young ages now are being given an awful lot of responsibility to organize themselves in learning situations, that they're encouraged to take on board decision making that in our generation it was unheard of. Are we doing that in football? Now, I'm suggesting it. Monitor it, track it, see how well it works or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've given us some key things though, right? And I don't remember where this information came from one of your slides, but it was fun, understand children, and understand age appropriateness. And then by the side of that, people want to know how to coach, not what to coach, for example, just to relate. So basically, with the work that they're doing in iCoachKids.eu is know who's in front of you, right? Know who's in front of you and can it be relative? And I think it might have been Horst Vane that said a children's sporting experience should be unique. It should be like their shoes. It should fit them and it should be comfortable. And I could be wrong on that quote on who said it. But I think, Robin, obviously you've given us loads of ideas, and I think it would be a very interesting project for all Rush clubs to do. Obviously, you know, I'm sure clubs have a retention plan, but I'm not sure how many actually share that retention plan and how do we do it. And I think there's times where we don't do exit interviews and we don't do entry interviews, and we just consider, oh, you know, the numbers are up, but we don't look at what the turnover is. You know, so this is obviously, you know, Tim has a goal for Rush Soccer to get to 100,000 players by, you know, 2040, for example. You know, but if we retain them and we keep them in sports, and I believe it's China, Robin, and you may know better, but I think they have like a walk-in league for like people over 70. It's walking football, but they still get together, they play, you know, just keeping people involved in the sport for as long as possible.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's easier. It should be easier to keep existing customers than it is to get new customers. And so most associations and clubs around the world do a very good job at attracting kids to football. Given the enormous exposure of soccer on TV and in FIFA e-games, the retention rate should be through the roof. I mean, in Europe and in Asia, you know, the exposure to soccer is phenomenal. It should be through the roof. And increasingly in North America, you've got access to TV that 20 years ago you wouldn't have had. So it can't be the fact that, oh, well, you know, I get here, well, it's a different culture. You know, our kids can't watch TV. You can watch more TV in the USA, top class soccer, both MLS and European and South American, and probably anywhere else in the world. So if what we were doing previously was so good, our retention rates would have been through the roof. Now they're not, and we therefore have to look, well, what else can we try? Now, I don't know whether free play is going to automatically increase the numbers retaining. There is some evidence to show that this is the case, and there is some evidence to, as Amy Price would show, there's some evidence that involving their imagination will retain their interest. But you need the data. You need to track it in your own club, to track the data in your own club, to see how well you're doing and who's doing well and who's not doing well, and how can we help the ones who are not doing well.
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned the flag football, I know that US ice hockey, their retention rates have been higher with some of the stuff that you're doing. Have you ever looked into some of the stuff that USA ice hockey's done, Robin? Is there any other sports that are leading?
I haven't seen their figures. the best you get from most sports is their overall registration numbers. Now, what we've been able to do for USU Soccer in this project with Adam Kum at Satori Soccer is dig below the overall retention, the overall participation numbers, and look at how much of that potential, how much of that participation is growth and how much it is retention. As I say, I've looked at the ice hockey figures on their website, and they would appear to have gone up and down and going up again, but that's their overall numbers. I'm not sure, it doesn't give any indication about their retention figures. Because to get the retention figures, you've got to track the individual players. So, for example, what Adam Kunn does at Satori Soccer, him and another guy called Alan Lefebvre, they take the data from state associations in Excel files, and the only data they have is the date of birth, the gender of the kid, and the club, and therefore, you know, they don't know emails or anything like that. And a player ID number, date of birth, club, and gender, and they then track the individual player through season after season, and that's the only way you can. You need to track the individual player, and you will track players leaving one club and going to another. All right, well, at least the growth is within the state, and they're still in the sport. There's new players that come in that haven't been in the sport. This is the first time that they're in, so it shows the overall growth per club, the growth per sport, and the turnover. And you have to track the individual to be able to do that. That's just the start.
We got a question.
That gives you the.
We've got a question that's come in, Robin.
Okay.
It's from Andrew Crawford from Gateway. He says, do you think some retention in clubs comes from wins and losses from games through a season? Again, it needs to be tracked, right?
I would say, without repeating myself, what does the data say? Not what I think. What does the data? In your club, if very successful clubs, you'd say, well, we retain players. Yes, I'm sure competitive clubs would retain. It shows that competitive clubs, the retention rate in teenagers in soccer in America, once they enter competitive soccer, is quite good. The issue I would say is it's quite good for those born in quarter one, quarter two, quarter three. And secondly, you've missed out on those ones that started at 5, 6, and 7. And also, there's a group there who don't want to play competitive soccer, but would like to play recreational football when they're 14, 15, 16. Yeah. So I understand your question, Andrew. I would say, I don't know. Find the data and let's see, is there a relationship between winning and retention? I don't know. But what I do know is that there's only a very few number of clubs and teams who are going to be able to win every year. But let's have a look. Have a look at that particular issue. But I would have thought that the main aim of the club is to try and get as many players and keep them for as long as possible. How that is done, you'd get the answers by tracking the data.
Yeah, I think sometimes we get it backwards, right? We're on this quest to start travel programs early, as opposed to keeping as many players playing in the best possible environment for as long as possible. You know, so I don't think there's any further questions, Robin, unless they start coming in. But did you have any ending statements? Was there any questions or statements that I missed and didn't ask you?
Well, no. When this recording gets distributed, there will be a link to a survey for Rush coaches. Would be really grateful if you could complete the survey and involved in this particular debate. And this particular survey is exclusive just to Rush coaches.
Fantastic. And then once they complete the survey, Robin, they do get a small prize for completing the survey. Is that correct?
Yes, they get a discount on a course if they like that. They don't have to have it. There's a discount on a course, a very large discount on a course. They also get access to the blog that we shall create on coaching retention, coaching for retention, which hopefully then can spark off some discussions in their own club.
Yeah, well, in their own club and across the Rush Nation, as it were, and stuff like that. Because, you know, Tim has this goal of 100,000 players, but you know, if there's not growth and there's not retention, we're not going to hit that 100,000.
Well, it'd be a lot harder to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Can
Robin,
I just say that often people say, if the national team does well, it'll have an enormous effect. Now, there are instances of national teams do well. The national team of Greece won the Euros in 2004, and it affected, and it hardly registered in terms of participation. It created lots of interest in Greece for a number of months afterwards, but it didn't affect participation, mainly because they weren't geared up at that point in terms of clubs and teams and coaches. The first time when France had the World Cup in '98, they won the World Cup. They had a terrific interest in football, but they hadn't yet geared up in terms of clubs and teams and coaches. Now, when they had the Euros, the last Euros in 2016, they were set up. Sadly, they didn't win it, but the fact that they hosted it and it was an excellent tournament, they had the backup. So the idea that large events automatically increase participation isn't borne out of the facts. The London Olympics were supposed to have created 1 million more participants. It didn't, because there wasn't enough time and money spent on infrastructure for the grassroots performer, the grassroots participant. So it isn't just about, well, if the national team do well. If you have a great structure, if you have a good structure of clubs and coaches and teams, then yes, if you host and you do well in a competition, that can have an effect. But doing well by itself won't have much effect.
Yeah, brilliant.
Okay,
Robin, you've been fantastic.
All right, thanks very much. Thanks for the opportunity, and look forward to reading the responses in the survey.
Yeah, and we'll get that out if you want to send that to me, and we'll get that going. So
Okay.
I hope you're well. You look well.
Okay.
Brilliant
Thanks
as always. We'll talk soon. Thanks. See you, Robin. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.